It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a horrible, horrible tragedy over the weekend. The first I saw of the tornado that ripped through the heart of our country was the video of the town from Mayfield, Kentucky, that just devastating. In fact, showed the kids and you're going, cannot believe the kind of devastation we saw there. And look, throughout Arkansas, throughout Kentucky, throughout Indiana, just ripped to shreds. And my first thought was, well, we should get ready for more of this. We should probably get used to these kind of stories because they seem to be happening more often. We seem to be seeing bigger, much more deadly storms. So we probably should start budgeting for this. Maybe we should have a special tax for it. I don't, at this point, I don't know. But we're not moving quickly enough to deal with our climate change issues. We're not moving quickly enough to address the underlying causes of these much more deadly storms. And look, there are more coming. All of the scientists agree. There may be a quack or two out there who's the outlier going, no, the oil industry pays me a lot of money, so I can't possibly be against big oil. The first thing I saw over the weekend, what was there? They said immediately there were 70 dead throughout, these states, and more missing. I see the Kentucky governor today confirmed 64 dead. I think they said at least 105 people unaccounted for. So some of them are going to be gone, and you hear these stories coming out, how Amazon wouldn't let their workers go home. In fact, there was somebody texted his wife saying, they're not going to let us leave. There's the candle factory. In Kentucky, where the workers were told, if you leave, you'll probably get fired. And you go, what? And I know the companies have all said, they've all denied it. They all have protocols, supposedly. And they absolutely deny it because, hey, they would be liable. Major lawsuits are probably still coming, but they have to come out and deny it. Now, here's the thing. I've known people who've worked in places where that's happened, where if you leave, you're going to be fired for whatever the reason is. There have been companies that, someone says, hey, our relatives in the hospital, if they pass away, I'm leaving. And they've been told, well, if you leave before your shift, you'll be disciplined or you'll be fired. And you go, what kind of heartless people do this? Oh, that's right, capitalists. Corporate America, because it's all about the profit. It's about getting those candles out the door. Those ever so important candles that are going to be the wonderful, thoughtful Christmas gifts that nobody wants. But if you leave, shame on you. And it's disgraceful that in this country that's allowed to happen, but it does. And, my first thought is, why? Why would you put up with that? Oh, that's right. Because you don't have a voice on the job. You don't have the ability. Over 90% of the workforce in this country are at-will employees, which means they can be fired for any or no reason. So leaving, you could get fired for. I have a hard time understanding why you would allow yourself to be in that situation. But, the Kentucky governor said, hey, there's going to be all of this cleanup done. In fact, Mitch McConnell actually praised President Biden for his swift response. And I'm like, what did you expect him to do? Something like the last guy would do? Hold it up for a little bit because, hey, you didn't vote for me. I'm going to make sure you don't get anything. I'm going to hold this over you in your hour of need. What's Trump going to show up and throw paper towels? Crazy. Rand Paul wrote a letter, and I love this. Rand Paul wrote a letter. The governor of the Commonwealth has requested federal assistance this morning, and certainly further requests will be coming as the situation is assessed. I fully support those requests, writes Rand Paul, and ask that you move expeditiously to approve the appropriate resources for our state. And you go, but Rick, that's his state. He's taking care of his constituents. Yeah. And he should do that. He should have done it as it was going on. They should have been mobilizing the everything as it's happening. The response should have been heading in that direction. As I understand, it was. My problem here is Rand Paul. Again, Rand Paul, the guy who voted against the first responders bill. The same Rand Paul who voted against disaster relief for the people of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Yes, the same Rand Paul who voted against disaster relief for the Northeast after Hurricane Sandy. Yes, the same Rand Paul who voted against disaster relief after Hurricanes Laura and Delta in Louisiana. And yes, that same Rand Paul who voted against disaster relief after Hurricane Harvey in Texas. Oh, and let's not forget the 2019 disaster relief appropriations bill he voted against. So he's got a long history of going, well, those people, no. But my people, well, absolutely. We want everything. And expeditiously. Yeah, I kind of got a problem with that. Because sadly, I think we're going to end up in a moment where the next guy, if it's the former guy, shame on you if you're in a state that didn't vote for him. Scary, scary stuff. And we're really in this weird moment where it's going to get worse because we're not addressing it. We're not doing anything. We can't even get the money to say, hey, well, let's move to electric vehicles. We can't get the resources and the money to say, hey, let's put more solar panels in places that are going to be useful. We can't get that done because, well, the Joe Manchins of the world and the entire Republican Party. So, yeah, get ready for more of this. It's going to keep happening to nobody's delight. And it's all fun and games, and it's all, well, until it's you, until it hits your backyard. And then maybe these folks in Kentucky are not going to be going, maybe we should be addressing that climate change. Maybe as we build back, maybe we can build back better and make the buildings be able to withstand the winds that are coming. Because guess what? That region of the country, going to get hit a lot. I was reading an article that said, that area, prime for tornadoes. And the ones that are coming, the bigger ones, even more so. Sad, sad stuff. Speaking of sad stuff, over the weekend, we crossed another milestone. COVID-19 deaths passed 800,000. Thank you, former guy. Thank you for everyone who is held up, everyone being vaccinated. Thank you for the idiots running around without their masks on. Thank you for the dimwits and the puddle brains and the morons. Thank you. Because evidently this is what you've wanted. Today I spent a good portion of my day in an emergency room. I spent some time with a relative who we had to be in the emergency room. We're there 8 hours. Half of that emergency room were COVID patients. Now, 8 hours for something relatively simple. Nothing life-threatening. Relatively simple. Should have been in and out. This should have been quick. And in any normal day, would have been maybe 2 hours max. But today, and well, for the last year and a half, they've been at maximum capacity. The beds are all full. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to admit people. In fact, we sat on a chair in a hallway waiting to be seen. There were people that lined up in beds in the hallways waiting to be seen and moved into a room. Literally nowhere to go. And we haven't even hit bad times yet. Supposedly, we haven't maxed out yet, according to reports. But then again, we haven't hit the peak yet. We're still climbing, and it's going to get worse. And we know the COVID's going to get worse, and we know that this Omicron that's coming through going to get even much more worse. I look at what's going on over in England right now, and like anything, they're just now. We're probably next at some point. We're all in the Shark Tank together. We will all eventually be the flavor of the month. But right now, they're saying they're preparing for up to 200,000 Omicron cases a day. They are telling their hospitals to send people home, get as many people out the door as you can who can survive out there. so that they can fill the beds up with people who are going to need the ventilators and all the stuff. In fact, when the ambulances come in, they're basically dropping people so that they can answer the more than 999 road calls they got on this particular day. And I'm looking at this and I'm sitting here and I can't help but see how they've set it up. Half the emergency room was people in the waiting room out in the front. You've been to an emergency room. Half of the people were there for something other than COVID. Half the people were there for COVID. And they were divided by this magic line. It's like the old no smoking signs. On this side of the sign, no smoking. On that side of the sign, smoking. And there was supposedly a magic line between them where it stopped. This is the same kind of thing. On this side of the walk aisleway, COVID. On this side, no COVID. Magic line. And I couldn't help but sit there and look at these folks and wonder, how many of you are vaccinated? I couldn't help but talk to some of the nursing staff, some of the people who work there, and ask them, what are the numbers here? And overwhelmingly, the people who are in that hospital, they didn't tell me any particular person, but overwhelmingly, the people who are in the hospital with COVID are unvaccinated. It is what it is. Overwhelmingly, the people who are coming in, unvaccinated. And you go, but don't we know that they could? Yeah. And that's kind of where it is. And I look at these folks who show up every day, and they deal with this every single day. I was there one day and was ready to strangle people, dealing with the anger issues, dealing with people unable to have a simple conversation and understand that someone else has a point of view. Because look, the reception woman, I felt so sorry for her because nobody evidently hears anymore. They spew. And as the woman's trying to explain, they're not having it. And this is what this has all gotten us. We're in this spot where we no longer are able to communicate. And I look at these people who show up every day and deal with people on their worst days. Deal with people who, this is not a happy time for them. And are able to smile and are able to be nice to people and are able to care. I mean, that's the weird thing for me. And it gives me hope in humanity. It gives me some bit of hope that maybe better is possible. That not all of us are dimwits, puddle brains, and morons. But sadly, still enough of us are. And will it take another 800,000? Is this what it's going to take? I sure hope not. But that number of 800,000, kind of jumps out at you. When you have people go, it was no big deal. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal when 800,000 people are gone. Yeah, but, and you get this one all the time, they had comorbidities. Maybe so. But they still had more time. And this took that from them. And the question that I keep coming back to is, what are we going to do going forward? Are we going to continue down this path? Are we going to continue fighting every step of the way because somehow we're the victim for having for someone to request us to be decent? I live in an area where, it's a fairly rural area. It's a small hospital. Packed. And I worry about the people who, the car crash, the police officer who comes in, you name it, who's now, one, got to wait longer to get the services that they need because there's no room for them. And two, now exposed to all of the people who have COVID. And as I'm sitting there, I couldn't help but think that I'm in a place where it is. I have done my foolhardy best to stay away from it at every turn. Don't go to the places where it could be. I stay away from large crowds if I can. I do the things that I can to just kind of back off a little bit. And when I am in large crowds, I try to give myself a little room. I don't get too close to people. I wash my hands enough. But I'm looking at this going, Everyone should see what's going on in these places. Everyone should see the dedication of these workers, of these frontline heroes. Because I know we've forgotten the language. I know we've forgotten the verbiage we used to use and the accolades we used to throw. Essential, frontline hero, patriotic. I know we've forgotten that. It's long in the rearview mirror. Because a lot of us think, well, we're by it. It's over. We're vaccinated, most of us. Let them go. We're not past it. We still have things to do. And this comes back to our politics. I don't know how wearing a mask or getting vaccinated, I don't know how these became political issues. But we better figure our politics out. We better figure them out quickly. Because the virus ain't going anywhere. The climate is only going to get worse. They're saying there's a giant chunk of ice about ready to crack off that within the next couple of years could quite frankly raise the sea level several feet, which means major crisis of refugees rushing from the coasts. And what are we doing about it? Nothing. I don't see us doing anything about it because it hasn't hit yet. And then it'll be, oh my God, we've got to do something. Too late. And, it may not affect me entirely, but it's going to affect my kids. It's going to affect my grandkids. It is coming. Crazy, crazy stuff. But my heart goes out to the folks in Kentucky and Indiana and Arkansas and Missouri and those states where this tornado has just uprooted lives and destroyed everything these folks have had. I'm waiting for, and you can mark it on a calendar, I'm waiting for the insurance companies to be able to weasel their way out of paying, and these folks ending up getting the short end of the stick. And I really feel for the people who didn't have insurance and who are going to be, they're going to be out everything that they've ever had. Because if you saw those videos, if you saw the footage from the tornado site, it is total devastation. Scary, scary stuff. Got a lot to get to today. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, former Ohio Democratic Party Chairman David Pepper is going to be here to share some thoughts on what's going on, maybe talk a little bit about the gerrymandering and how the GOP plans to steal 2022 and beyond. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. That's all. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. That was the day prominent civil rights activist Ella Baker was born in Norfolk, Virginia. Her parents moved to Littleton, North Carolina when she was young. She often listened to her grandmother's stories of slave revolts and of the brutality she endured under slavery. Ella attended the historically black college Shaw University, graduating in 1927. After college, she moved to New York City and worked as a journalist. Ella was profoundly impacted by the Harlem Renaissance and became an educator for the WPA, teaching African and labor history. She immersed herself in the activism of the period and worked on the Scottsboro Boys Defense Campaign. By 1938, she had joined the NAACP, traveling across the country to direct membership recruitment, fundraising, and building of local branches. In 1952, Ella became president of New York City's NAACP chapter, working for desegregation and on police brutality cases. Baker went to Alabama to help found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference after the successful Montgomery bus boycott to organize voter registration drives throughout the South. From there, she formed and led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Ella trained young, committed civil rights activists in a collectivist model of organizing and in participatory democracy. By 1964, she helped to organize the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party and its fight to become seated at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. She was involved in the defense of activist and friend Ann Braden, then targeted by HUAC, and later the Free Angelina movement in defense of then-jailed activist Angelina Davis. She was instrumental in the founding of the Third World Women's Alliance and supported various independence movements throughout the world. She died on her birthday in 1986.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Our quote of the day comes from Ohio Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. He said, quote, Republican politicians are weaponizing redistricting to choose their voters rather than the other way around. He said, we can't let them get away with that, with weakening voters' voices in our democracy. He says, quote, it is time to end the filibuster and protect voting rights in America. And you can't disagree with that. And we've been saying this for months now. It's now time to actually get some action and do something about it. And here to share some thoughts on why this is imperative and maybe how we get to go about it, I've asked David Pepper to come talk with us. David is the former head of the Ohio Democratic Party. He's also the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So you got your state senator saying, hey, we got to end this filibuster thing. We got to get something done on voting rights. We've got to take back some of the control because guess what? 2022 is just around the corner.
Yeah. And he, Ohio, myself and him and others, we've seen it up close. What they're doing to these states. I mean, we're basically, crying out to these senators. A lot of these states no longer really resemble functioning democracies, whether it's gerrymandered congressional seats, gerrymandered state house and state senate seats, other ways of voter suppression, like purging the voters for infrequent voting. I mean, it really is out of control. It's at this point, just to make it clear how bad it is, you essentially have a group of people in these state houses in Ohio and elsewhere who themselves have never really been in real elections. They haven't really been in democracy. All they've known is a set of rigged elections. So, they're basically doing all they've known. And that's why it's the federal government, which literally has a duty in the Constitution to make sure that all states are democracies. And I'm glad Sherrod Brown is calling upon that. Others are. It's late in the game. It sounds dramatic unless you know the stakes. They really should not go home for recess until this is done.
No, I agree.
You start getting into 22, as you know, the election cycle starts. It's already started. It's too late, and they've got to show this is as serious as those of us living through it know that it's serious.
Right, but we've been talking about this for a long time. And, the other time when there was a chance to do something about it was during the Obama years. And Obama just said, well, if they're going to do that, we have to go get more votes. Well, there's a point at which you can't make up for the number of votes that they're blocking. You just can't do it.
You can't. I mean, we're a great case study. It's not even right to ask these voters. We're talking about brutal voter suppression. So if they are purging hundreds of thousands of voters from the rolls, to then say to your volunteers, go re-register those voters, battle government suppression with volunteer efforts, it's not a fair fight. And at a certain point, and this is part of what happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016, she spent so much of her time re-registering purge voters. We all know she didn't get enough time with swing voters all over states like Ohio. So once you start forcing campaigns to make up for absolute suppression by government, it's a losing proposition. Every once in a while it may work, but it's not the right thing to ask folks to do. And it's in the end, you won't ever make up the gap for brutal gerrymandering that rigs elections and the suppression of hundreds of thousands or millions of voters. You're just not going to be able to do that on a voluntary basis.
Now, what do you say to the person, David, who goes, but I've got conservative friends who they look at the ballot box and they complain that Democrats are stealing it, they're stuffing it, they've got illegals, they've got all of these fanciful ideas of things that Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and the pillow guy and all the whole cavalcade of crazy kept spewing to them. They truly believe that the game's rigged. So the justification is, well, we're just doing what the game allows.
Yeah, at some point, you try and battle facts with facts, but at this point, you simply get it done in the Senate. We have 50 senators, we have a majority of the House, we have a president. We have to get it done in this window. And so even if, hopefully some Republicans understand it, others won't, at some point, You just got to go make it happen. And when you have the majorities, which we do, you have to do it. So the key conversation is actually in this case with Joe Manchin and other senators, and he's not the only one, let's be clear,
Right.
who are not taking the position Sherrod Brown is, and they're hung up on getting a filibuster. Now, we could debate the filibuster all day on a lot of topics, but I sincerely believe that if you read the Constitution and you understand that in states across the country, Republicans are attacking democracy and voting rights by passing laws without ever getting one Democratic vote. So that they don't say they need to get at the state level Democrat buy-in. Well, why should we require getting Republican buy-in at the federal level to protect against these attacks at the state level that don't get Democratic buy-in? It's asymmetric warfare, and you lose it. And we don't need to convince, Rob Portman of this. We simply need to convince 50 Democrats and continue to do what the House already did and just get it done. And then we can spend all next year, pushing what we've done on infrastructure, talking about Build Back Better if it passes. This is not necessarily something you run on, but you got to get it done to give, candidates and voters a fair chance to participate in democracy, which in too many states right now, they just don't have.
Yeah, no, I've had conversations about your state of Ohio and mine of Pennsylvania as well. Where I live in Pennsylvania, there was the one election year where, Democrats got 500,000 more votes, but only won 5 of the 18 congressional seats because it is so badly gerrymandered. And Ohio, kind of the same thing, only the difference is in Pennsylvania, Democrats usually win statewide offices while Republicans usually win them in Ohio. So what I get from people is going, well, Ohio's a solid red state. And I'm going, not so much. It's kind of a gerrymandered state. And the reason I think they win those statewide races is because a lot of people have gone, what's the point of me voting in a 65-35 district?
Right. Well, there are a couple of things going on. Our general breakdown is somewhere Republicans vote in these congressional races statewide for Republicans in about the low to mid 50s. Democrats, even in these terribly gerrymandered districts, added up around Ohio, we're getting about 45 or 46. A fair map would mean out of 15 districts, we have, 7 in a good year, 6 in a not so good year. The map they're proposing is literally 13-2 or 12-3. It's outrageous. The last decade, even in an Obama blue year, even in a year where Sherrod won by 8, the map was always the same outcome: 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats. It's total, and none of them were even close. It's totally rigged. So of course, Democrats aren't walking in and saying, we deserve 13 out of 15 seats or 12 out of 15. But us trying to get, let's say Democrats pushed a map that was somehow 11 Democrats and 4 Republicans. That's as out of whack with how Ohio voters are voting as the current Republican proposed map. So they're going way beyond what would be normal, anywhere close to fair. And you add it all up in Ohio and Pennsylvania, other states, that way you guarantee the entire Congress for a decade.
Right.
And at some point, this looks more like how Russia runs democracy Putin runs democracy in Russia and Orban in Hungary than it does America. And at some point, we've got to wake up to that problem. And here's the good news: the bills that passed the House and that is now in front of the Senate correct for this and many other problems if they simply pass it.
No, it's something we absolutely have to do. But in talking about what you were just saying there, you look at the numbers and it explains why nothing that we the people want actually gets done. When you're not afraid of the voting populace because the game is already rigged, you're not really that responsive to the needs of the people. And we had talked not too long ago about a representative in your state who, when a constituent called and said, hey, how come we can't do something about this town that is basically, abandoned? And the guy said, move. I don't know in what functional democracy a representative tells their constituent, hey, if you don't like it, move. I don't get it.
Yeah. And this is a really important point. If this is what I would say to the hypothetical Republican friend you mentioned, that even though we don't have to convince them to pass the current bill, the current state of democracy and the lack of choice in elections is crushing not just blue parts of these states, but red parts of these states. These towns that we're talking about, the ones that are like the rural county seat or smaller, they desperately need infrastructure. The infrastructure is popular in these places because they have the streets that have never been paved in years, or other problems. Their main streets are dying, yet their state reps and especially their Congress people are voting against those things, not just once, but for years. And they're voting for a trickle-down economy approach that never helps lift these towns. And they do it for the reason you mentioned. They're never going to lose. So the public outcomes, as bad as they are in these small towns and these rural areas, they don't cost these people anything to vote, the Congress people. So the decline in rural Ohio and small town Ohio is directly related to the fact that there's no democracy in these places. And so it's not just a blue-red thing. When it comes to how so much is falling apart that we used to think was strong, this sort of small, mid-sized town pride that was the core of places like Pennsylvania and Ohio, it's collapsing in large part because there's no democracy left in these places. It may feel good. They see someone of their own party winning an election, but it doesn't feel good when the towns represented by these people are falling apart and the people in office are voting against what these towns need again and again and again.
No, you're right. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with David Pepper. He's the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party, also the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. In looking at this legislation, which some of it seems really common sense. We should allow every person to vote. That seems like common sense. It's something we used to have for a moment or two. It seems to me that there are ways that we can open it up to make voting a lot easier. I would like to see a holiday. I would like to see, on a weekend, I would like to see a lot of things done.
Yeah.
But I find interesting that a lot of my conservative friends, not so interested in changing any of that stuff. They kind of like the rigidity of that second Tuesday of the month from 7 to 7, and I don't quite know why.
Well, what's funny is I hear that often, and I normally vote on that Tuesday too, and that's fine. But most states move to early, like Ohio. We had a disaster in 2004. Everyone knew it. It was Republicans who were in charge that opened up early voting, not Democrats, after the disaster of 2004, where there was not enough capacity on election day to deal with all the voters. So they opened it up. And the truth is, a lot of people found it to be convenient, both Republicans and Democrats. And now we've got this. Here's an example where I agree with you to some degree, but polling shows us that the thing the number of states started doing a couple of years ago, where you can drop that ballot in a drop box, where you don't have to pay a postage stamp, as opposed to putting it in the mail, has turned out to be incredibly popular. Voting numbers go higher. In Ohio, 80% of voters polled said they would love to have more drop boxes. And in rural Ohio, they don't want to drive an hour each way on a small rural highway to deliver that vote to a drop box. So there's also support there. But in the end, because it does help in cities, they aren't doing it. So in some cases, when you actually break it down to what the specific thing is, voting early, because maybe you'll get called away that last weekend and you don't end up being able to vote, voting by a drop box. These are things that when you ask about them individually are actually very popular. But the people in these state houses, believing some of the hype or wanting to make voting harder, simply can't find it within themselves to make it so that more and more people vote. But we know these different mechanisms. Washington State, Oregon, much higher levels of voting, no fraud. Why? Because they've made it more convenient. Right. And by the way, until the last couple of years, a lot of these measures weren't even partisan or controversial. Georgia was the state with the Republicans in charge of everything that had drop boxes all over the place. No one even said a word about it until the pandemic. Now they're trying to get rid of them. But these things were never controversial. There was never problems. They were never partisan. So this is getting back to this sort of right-wing big lie machine that is saying that all this stuff is fraudulent and there are all these people voting fraudulent. It's just not true. And so that's allowing them to cut off these ways of voting that have actually been very convenient for people.
Yeah, but it's like the old saying: you say the lie big and long enough, people are going to
Yeah.
believe it. And I still have people who want to argue with me that here in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump won Pennsylvania because he was up by 600,000 votes on Tuesday night. And they will not get it through their head that, that's because only half of the people got to vote. They didn't count the rest of the votes for the next several days because they were in paper ballots.
Yeah, it's very common, and it's being amped up. One thing, by the way, that Pennsylvania should do in Ohio, and this goes back to a Democratic Secretary of State, they actually run all the ballots through the machines that come in early before Election Day. They don't wait. So this problem that it comes so late and for days after, they don't actually total the numbers until Election Day, but they run them through. So in Ohio, the first votes announced at 7:40, about 10 or 15 or 20 minutes after the polls close, are all the early votes that came in up until Election Day. And it's made at least that part of these crazy theories go away.
Yeah,
and we have the reverse outcome here. For an hour or two, Democrats around the country think that the Democrats way ahead in Ohio, and then the day of votes catch up. Now, no one's sitting around acting like that's some kind of conspiracy. It's just, but I will say, by getting the votes in early and running them through the machines early, we do end up cutting off a lot of this, conspiracy stuff when they come in late and things change in the late hours or the next couple of days. That's something every state could fix if they wanted to. By the way.
Last question I've got for you: how do we move forward on this? How do we get? I know Pat Toomey's not going to come around magically in his final days. I know Rob Portman's probably not going to come around. How do we get this move through?
They won't touch it. I think Joe Manchin. I'll give him credit. He's clearly wants to be bipartisan. Okay, that's his thing. That's how he's been. When he realizes that the side that is suppressing the vote is not going to magically all of a sudden vote to stop that suppression, my hope is his effort of being bipartisan, he figures out it's not working, and then they come up with a way to not get rid of the filibuster entirely. Joe Manchin and other Democratic senators aren't going to do that. But in the area of lifting democracy in states, so states like Ohio actually have democracy again, they're just the filibuster. There's no legitimate basis for it to be used to stop voting rights legislation. This is something we've talked about this before. The founding fathers literally worried that corrupt state houses could undermine our entire country's democracy. And they wrote in the Constitution that all states, they said, the federal government shall guarantee they all have a democracy, basically.
Yep.
There's no reason a filibuster should ever get in the way of that.
I'm right there with you.
Folks like Joe Manchin to see that after making a good faith effort to get Republicans, which they're unfortunately not going to get.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. David, I appreciate the time. Great stuff, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care.
Good stuff. David Pepper, former head of the Ohio Democratic Party. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it's kind of interesting to me as Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney were reading some texts today. Kind of interesting why the Lauren Boeberts and the Marjorie Trader Greens and that ilk are so hell-bent on us not seeing what they were doing with their phones on January 6th. We're now finding out. In fact, some really interesting texts came out today. Well, a couple from Donald Jr. Dumb Jr. was actually almost the voice of reason on January 6th, was actually the most astute political advisor, and I can't actually believe I said that. But here to share some thoughts on, have I just lost my mind? Did I wake up on the wrong side of reality? I've got Fred Wellman here to talk with us. He's a political consultant and senior advisor to the folks over at the Lincoln Project. Fred, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be here, Rick. Thanks a lot.
So I'm looking at the texts today, and I guess I've always thought of Junior as kind of a dope, not too bright, whatever. This was actually fairly good advice.
Well, that's true, but I'm not gonna lie. I find great entertainment the fact that he had to text the chief of staff of the White House to get hold of his dad. I mean, it's just, I mean, what does that say right there? I mean, maybe he had good advice, but he couldn't get it to his own father. He had to go to the chief of staff and beg the chief of staff. And that's the thing. I mean, and what I think we talked about a little bit, it's really telling to see the conversations that are occurring that day. And as somebody pointed out that I stole, of course, because I always do that, this is the unprivileged stuff. Can you imagine what's in the privileged? What's he hiding? I mean, this is stuff he wasn't hiding. I can only imagine what he hid or is trying to hide. Right. And that's probably the conversations begging Trump to do something, who refused to do so. I think today was a very powerful day. I think the committee did a genius job of reading them out loud. I personally am just absolutely chomping at the bit, waiting for public hearings so we can see this live in real time.
Yeah, before we go into any further stuff, do you think it's going to matter? Do you really honestly and truthfully think at this moment it's going to matter? Because I'll tell you, I think we're so in our camps that I don't know that there are any 3s or 4s left. I think everyone's a 5 at this moment.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, we are in our separate corners. We've all picked our sides. It's very hard to break through our separate media ecospheres. We don't bridge that gap very well. I'm actually working on a new project right now that I'm very excited about. I can't announce yet that's going to research a little bit of that. It's like, how do we break through each other? But you're right. But in the end, for me, Rick, is I kind of given up the idea that I'm going to convince a lot of these folks. What I do want is justice. I was a soldier for 22 years. What we saw was an attack in our capital. Almost 150 police officers went to the hospital. To me, I just want justice at this point. Maybe that's all it's going to take. Maybe somebody finally goes to jail. We'll finally see some justice. But actually reaching the other side, I don't see it happening.
Because most of the people who I know are still Trump supporters, and most of the ones who are Trump supporters are still. They have a different narrative. They look at the January 6th not as how I look at it, as an attempt to overthrow our democracy and stop the certification of an election that had no reason to be stopped. But they still look at it through this alternative rationale lens that I don't know that we're ever going to be able to reach them. And I think that's dangerous because, look, 10 years down the road, I still think this is with us.
Yeah, that's the terrifying part. And look at the history. And it's Godwin's law. You're not supposed to bring up the Nazis. I got that. Well, let's look a historic example of a time where a democracy fell to an autocratic movement. April 8th, 9th, 1923, beer hall putsch, Munich, Germany. Hitler uses his right-wing General Ludendorff as his symbolic head of his movement. They stormed a beer hall in Munich where the Bavarian president was speaking, trying to convince him to lead a march to Berlin to take over the country. It fails when the police say, nah, and the soldiers say no. 16 Nazis die, about 6 police die. Hitler goes to jail. Hopefully that's the end of the story, right? But it wasn't, was it? That failed coup ended up teaching Hitler that he wasn't going to win the government through violence. He decided to go through the democratic levers of power. And he said something key that date, 10 years. 10 years later, Hitler is the chancellor of Germany through essentially a democratic process that he had manipulated, minority vote, and takes over and eventually taking over the entire country. So for me, I look a lot at the historic analogy of where we are, that a lot of folks were calling January 6th our Reichstag fire, but I completely disagree. January 6th was our beer hall push. And the autocratic movement we're facing is learning the lessons I think that they learned, which is, okay, so let's not do that. Let's take over election boards across the country. Let's pass 250 laws rolling back voting rights. Let's pass really creepy laws that mean that a legislator could basically overturn an election they deem as not right. I mean, that's what scares me the most, Rick, is I don't necessarily think we're going to have another maybe attempt on the Capitol, but I do believe we're going to have a worse movement, which is one that takes over our country through essentially our process.
Right. Now, this is where I just had a conversation with David Pepper, former head of the Ohio Democratic Party, and talking
Smart
about
guy.
Trying to do something about making sure that we're going to be able to vote in 2022 and beyond. Yep. And I can't say that that's assured based on what I'm seeing going on in some of these Republican-led states, and that's frightening to me.
Yeah, it is terrifying, and even states that aren't necessarily Republican. I mean, look at Georgia, and look at the way they're doing it. And what's really scary is they're pushing the local election boards, they're pushing out the local school boards, they're pushing these movements at the local level where a lot of these decisions are made. Remember, there is no national elections. There's There's elections managed across the country by different states and different local boards. So I think they're very aware, and I do believe, and I'm a critic of our Democratic Party. I am a Democrat for the last 6 years or so, and my frustration is there just seems to be an obtuseness and a lack of action to recognize the danger that democracy is in. I did catch you talking to David about the idea we can out organize this kind of suppression. The problem is it's not. I think we've gone beyond that. That you could almost make that argument 5 years ago or 4 years ago, even 2 years ago. But now they've passed so many laws that you can out organize, maybe even get the votes and say, well, sorry, look, that he dotted his I instead of crossing his T. So we're going to throw those 50,000 votes out. They've made these laws where they could literally just totally take over an election board. And even if we did out organize them, they could still toss our votes out. It's terrifying. Yeah. I mean, I wish somebody called me a doomer today. Like, well, yeah, I have a little doom and gloom. I admit that. I'm also fighting.
No, I'm a realist. I live in the real world, and I see what's going on. Right. And I've read the quote unquote confidential memos that the people like Jenna Ellis think are confidential because she wrote it across the top of the page. I'm looking at this stuff where there was a very well thought out plan on how they were going to overturn an election, the votes of we the people, and thought that we would swallow it. That's the amazing thing, that there were so many of them. Look, you could have one crank who comes up with this idea, but the fact that it permeated a number of places in that administration and a lot of people were briefed on it, that's scary.
And they're still keeping it secret. The funny thing about conspiracies is they usually come out. They're doing a pretty good job, and they're doing it right in front of us. I mean, I saw a great article today. Someone like, don't be fooled. They're not doing this in secret. They're not trying to take over our country in secret. They're doing it right in our face. Bannon's being very obvious. More than having to tell us exactly what he's doing. And unfortunately, I believe some of the people who we trust to be in power have a certain, I call it norms and traditions, right? They're all about norms and traditions. I remember a lot of people saying after the election they want to get back to normal. One of the things I say quite often, and I say it pretty crass, I won't say it on radio because it's not nice, but norms and traditions went out the freaking window when that orange guy came down the escalator. And if you think we're going to get back to norms and traditions, we're wrong. It's a pendulum, and the pendulum needs to swing back. A friend of mine is a sociologist here in St. Louis, and he teaches at one of the universities. He says, this is a sociological thing. And there's an experiment where they push the line of how far the line could go. And when you push the line of what's a norm and what's a tradition and what's a system, the new line becomes the line. And since we have not drawn, since we discovered the Hatch Act is completely useless, we discovered that most of the government ethics regulations hinge on the president being mad about it, and he doesn't, right? And so if we don't snap those back, we don't tighten those ethics laws, if we don't tighten the voting laws, then we have allowed a new norm to be set. And the next Trump won't be so stupid, and he'll be much greedier.
No, that's what I've been saying for a while. The reality is Trump was if someone whispered in his ear, it shot out his mouth. I don't think he had that filter. I'm concerned about somebody like DeSantis who's a little bit smarter, someone like Josh Hawley who's a little bit smarter, people who are true, in my words, fascists and true authoritarians who understand why and how to use the system, where Trump really didn't. He was just a bull in the china shop.
I live in Missouri now. The Attorney General here, Eric Schmidt, is running for Senate against Eric Greitens, of all people. The leading Republican candidate is an accused sexual assaulter and stealing, ethics regulations breaker already. But so Eric Schmidt's decided the best way he can run is to be outrageously more Trumpy and more right-wing anyway. So the Attorney General here is suing school districts over their mask mandates. He's suing private businesses for wanting to have vaccine mandates. He's literally spent the last year and a half using taxpayer money and using his office to perpetuate his bona fides as a right-wing nut job. And, meanwhile, crimes aren't being, prosecuted. Crimes aren't being addressed. But he's running around the state suing his own citizens. He actually put out a memo this week because he's misinterpreting the law, but he's convincing the school districts that they can't even tell kids to wear masks. In my girlfriend's school, kids are getting in fights at school because parents are sending their kids to school saying that their kids shouldn't wear masks. Kids are walking out of class, being forced into class. Kids are getting in fights over it because it's disturbing the class. He's literally creating vigilantism in high schools. A bus driver, a police officer got on a school bus and told the bus driver she couldn't tell the kids to wear masks and threatened her. And by the way, it was a police officer from a different district. That's going on because the Attorney General of Missouri in his brain has decided that's a great way to perpetuate his campaign. That is the next trouble, the Republican and Trumpist I'm scared of. That's evil and maniacal in its scope, that he'd allow kids in high school to fight each other to help him.
No, but that's predictable. I mean, all of this stuff is
Right.
in the playbook. We need the new brown shirts. We need to brainwash the kids into believing that they're victims, and nobody plays the victim card like Republicans.
Right.
You could disagree with that, but I'm watching Dr. Oz today go off about how the Philly Inquirer is going to call him by his actual
canceled.
name, and somehow he's now a victim.
Did you see the Pittsburgh? I'm here in Pittsburgh, not just here because I like beer and sandwiches. Jesus, man. But having said, yeah, exactly. And no, look, I'm an Iraq veteran. Okay, I was there for OIF-1. I spent a lot of times in Iraq. My first tour, I was doing civil affairs in northern Iraq, building schools and sitting with my Iraqi partners. And you know how Saddam ruled Iraq was he pitted everyone against each other. The reason a Sunni minority was able to rule Iraq for 35, 40 years, because he had the Shia, he had the Sunni, he had the Kurds all fighting each other. They're so busy hating each other. Nobody had time to hate him and overthrow him. And that's the maniacal brilliance of it. That's let's be honest, where genocide came from was, we have somebody to hate. Obviously, it's the Jews' fault.
Yeah.
And here we are in America. It's these these vaccine Nazis who are fascists. I mean, the idea that they're calling this administration fascist, they don't want us to die of a preventable illness. That's scary. And to me, to see high school students coming home frazzled from their day at school, not because it was hard or because school was tough, because the Attorney General of the state is encouraging vigilantism over masks, a piece of freaking cloth. And I tell you, I've seen this story. I had to fight through the desert to end that story. It tears me to death. It just tears me up to know that I might have to fight through my own country.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're in an interesting moment. They say, may you live in interesting times. These are those. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Fred Willman. Fred is a political consultant and also senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. So how do we move this back? I mean, the Lincoln Project started by former Republicans who saw what the former guy was doing. I thought there would be more of those kind of Republicans who would want to move away from, because look, I have respect for honest, true conservatives, people who want to save institutions, and the kind of people who aren't just flag waving, kind of look at me, but actually care about institution and the future of this country. I used to believe there was more of them. I guess I'm wrong.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And why are there so few of us who have turned on this? Why are there so few, if you will, the Reagan Republicans? I grew up I was a defense hawk. I was a soldier for my entire adult life. I believed in strong defense. I believed in coalitions. I was not terribly socially conservative, but I fit into that party. And then one day I woke up and I didn't fit in the party anymore. That had moved away from me. So you're right. I did expect more. I mean, it's nice to see the people we've had. It's nice to have allies like Bill Kristol or, the Republicans, for accountability, the Republican Accountability Project. We do have our allies, but just simply not enough. Too many have decided that power is more important. And the scarier part is, if you saw that article about Peter Mayer, the congressman, where he talked about how one of his colleagues literally told him on the floor during the impeachment vote, he simply could not vote for it for fear for his life, for fear for his family. That they're actually afraid of this. It's was it the leopard that eats your face, right? They're actually afraid of their own constituents that will turn on them, and not just run their political careers, but their entire lives.
Yeah.
And so.
And that's why they're taking pictures with guns around Christmas trees.
That's right. It's just extremists. The extremists are ruining the day. And look, I'd be lying if we said that this just popped up because of Trump. This is the inevitable conclusion. My colleague at Lincoln Project, Stuart Stevens, Stuart wrote a book called "It Was All a Lie," and it's sort of the realization that this has been building for 3 decades. This is the inevitable conclusion of a conservative movement that was becoming more and more extreme, and then Donald Trump sort of brought that out. So it'd be reckless of us to say it's new.
I remember '92 and the speeches Pat Buchanan was giving back then. He was radical in '92. Today he'd be a Democrat.
Yeah, just about, but you saw it. I mean, the thing that scared me, the politicization of our military, the failure of our political media to understand the moment they're in. I tweeted today. It's like, it's not like, it isn't that this isn't a partisan issue. Now it's democracy versus anti-democracy. It's autocracy versus democracy. It's only partisan because one party has given themselves over to an autocratic movement. Yeah. I'd love to go back to argue about tax policy. That'd be the best day ever, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I would love to. I wish we could have that, but we can't. But here's my problem. My problem is it's being framed right, left. It's being framed Democrat, Republican. It's being framed in all these ways. When the reality is, it's the extraordinarily wealthy against the rest of us. Because who's funding all of this stuff? For me, that's the central question in all of this. Who's funding it?
Shocking. Peter Thiel, the Koch brothers. I mean, it's all right there in front of you. You'd be a fool not to see it. Hell, Mr. Man of the Year is moving his country from California to Texas, right? I mean, I think it is right in your face all the time. And those powerful interests are able to spend ridiculous amounts of money. I was very disappointed to see Bernie Marcus gave $1 million to a PAC supporting Eric Greitens. My God, Eric Greitens is a monster. I know Eric Greitens. I've known Eric Greitens for over a decade. He's a monster. And this man gave him $1 million. How can you keep up with that? How do you and I, as average Americans, donate the maximum amount to a campaign of whatever we can afford, $50, possibly fight those kind of interests? And that's where the Lincoln Project came in. I think a lot of the reason we succeeded is we had a voice. We understood how to communicate to the audience. We had one moment. We had one thing we wanted to do: to convince 3 to 4% of Republicans that voted for Trump to not vote this time.
And you guys did a great job.
I'd like to say we were part of a coalition.
It was great. I'd love to have you talk about that at another point. But Fred, I got to take a quick break right here. I appreciate the time. Please come back.
I look forward to it.
Good stuff. Fred Wellman, political consultant, senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.